Hi, my name is Val Munsami. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the South African National Space Agency, and I want to talk to you about the space policy with the intention of engaging the youth.
Hello.
So previously, before 1994, South Africa had a number of different programs, but it was highly militarized. And we came under significant international pressure because of nuclear weapons and so on. So when we started to look at the space program, we looked at it from dual-use technology, sensitive technologies that went into satellites and so on, and how to control those particular technologies. So the key policy driver back in the day was around limiting the proliferation of dual-use technology. But what has actually happened is that policy driver has changed over the years because the industry has started to kick up, and then there's a space program in place. So the policy shift was from military use of space to now the civilian use of space. So that was a major shift in terms of policy. So effectively, when you talk about a space policy, you're looking at the principles around a space program and what defines the principles, the objectives of the program. So the main purpose of the policy is to provide a framework, and as I indicated, you've got principles and objectives. So if you look at the South African National Space Policy as an example, it talks about different elements of what's needed for a space program. So it talks about industry development as an example, the need for human capital development. And in fact, the National Space Policy is the only space policy in the world that talks about a regional focus. So we have a foreign policy in South Africa which talks about the development of the African continent. So that national space policy includes an aspect of African focus, international partnerships. So that's essentially the constructs of a national space policy. So the target audience for the national space policy is essentially the stakeholders that work in the space program, your policy makers, so that's essentially government departments. And so just to give you a sense, the policy is a high-level framework, but hinging from the policy, you have a number of strategic instruments. So we have a national space strategy as an example. So if you look at the policy objectives, the space strategy is mirroring what the policy is requiring. So in the strategy, you're essentially setting the direction in terms of this national space program. But the policy itself provides the objectives and the principles for the space program. Whereas the strategy, when you start to implement, it looks at the direction in which the program should be taking. In effect, both of those instruments are advocating for what is called a space ecosystem. Okay? So when we talk about a space ecosystem, you're going to have to look at the different thematic focus areas. So you have Earth observation, you have telecommunications, you have global navigation satellite services, and you have space exploration. But if you're giving effect to a program where you have products and services coming from those thematic areas, you need human capital development. You need the industry focus. You need international partnerships. So there's different elements that needs to come together, and the responsibility, for example, a National Space Agency is to support and develop those different elements. And then when you get to the day-to-day activities, what sort of missions you require, what sort of research and development programs you require, what sort of operational base you require, ground segments, data segments. And then when you look at the products and services, what sort of products and services should be coming out on the downstream? So you have an entire ecosystem that you're giving effect to. And the policy and the strategy is essentially informing how these different elements will come together. But on the framing of that ecosystem, you have the policy and the strategy on the one side. But then you also need to look at the business models in terms of how do you set up an agency? What is the macro structure of the agency? Because that will determine how you move the ecosystem along. So the policy and the strategy is a high-level framing of this ecosystem that government is saying we're committing to and that we want you to implement. So in terms of how these policies and the program itself, the space program, impacts on the youth, I'll give you maybe 2 or 3 different aspects. So let's look at it from a user requirements perspective. In fact, when we set up the space agency, what we had done is we had pulled together a number of government departments in a room, and we'd asked them, what is it that you want from the space agency once it's established? Now, we knew back then that government departments was using space products and services like satellite imagery to make policy level decisions. Now, those policy level decisions impact on the environment, as an example, water bodies, on the oceans, on in terms of urban and rural settlements, peace, security, defense, looking at disease vectors, movement of assets. All of that comes from space, including, for example, if you're watching live television, sports, and so on. All of that is enabled by satellite TV. So the issue is how do you bring space science and technology to impact in the modern day of life? So in effect, we are redefining our lifestyle, which impacts on the youth of today, like social media, access to communications, technologies, and so on. And a lot of that is coming from space. In fact, there's a shift that's happening right now in terms of what is called teleport services. So you're going to get global internet access from satellite technology. So there's going to be a multitude of satellites in orbit that will allow you to access the internet. So the second element around the impact to the youth, we have a bursaries and scholarships program. So we fund postgraduate sort of master's, PhD students. And the idea is we want to create our own timber or experts. So we want warm bodies that now come into the space sector and actually work in the space sector. So we want a pipeline of experts that are developed in the system that will then work in the system as we go along. So at the moment we are growing our focus. The space sector is growing. So as a consequence, we need more experts in the system. So that human capital development becomes quite crucial in terms of how we feed the system. So the empowerment of the youth and getting them into the system is going to be very critical. But we actually don't start at the university level, we actually start at the schools level. So we have an outreach program. And so per annum, we try to reach about 25,000 students. And the idea is to excite and enthuse the youth and the scholars, because there's nothing that excites kids as much as space science and technology. Kids want to be astronauts, they want to build satellites, they want to work in this domain. So we want to use space science and technology to excite the youth in terms of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we feel that the outreach that we are doing is quite impactful, and we're seeing a lot of interest in terms of science and technology coming out from the work that we're doing. We also have a mobile lab, which goes out to the schools and runs experiments and so on, and we have a science museum on site. So there's a lot of public tours that are happening where people from the public, including parents and students and so on, come through and we engage with them. So it's about creating the awareness and the actual pull-through factor in terms of pulling through some of these young kids into your master's and your PhD programs eventually, and eventually becoming experts in the space domain as well. There's a growth spurt that's happening in terms of the National Space Program. So there's quite a number of projects that are coming online, like we're getting a new Space Weather Center, which will be a 24/7 space weather center providing data to the aviation sector. There's also going to be a ground segment at Fontaine called a Deep Space Network that's going to support the lunar and the Mars missions. And so that's going to be directly supported from South Africa. We're also looking at a program management office for Digital Earth Africa, which is a platform that's going to provide satellite imagery to all African countries. We're also looking at a concurrent design facility for engineering of satellites, which is going to be revolutionizing how we actually build satellites in South Africa. So all of these different projects is going to provide opportunities for the youth to come into the sector. Now, what we're doing at the moment is we're currently building the foundation. And as you build the foundation, you can start to look for more opportunities. And in fact, right now, we're actually talking about a science mission. So maybe a space weather satellite that's going to go up. But we're also looking at the possibility of maybe having a mission that goes to the moon, as an example. And all of these are ideas that we're exploring Now, once you start to grow your expansion and look at a new vision and horizon, there's many more opportunities that come through. So, planetary missions, as an example, is something I've actually asked the youth this particular question, whether there's an interest in terms of planetary missions. And all of them answered unanimously yes, and we want to be part of that. So as we build that foundation, we're going to be looking for new opportunities. And in terms of access to space, I do understand it's a very expensive business to put an astronaut on the International Space Station. But that's something we still need to aspire towards, because there's nothing that aspires the entire country than getting a South African astronaut into space. And at one point in time, we will have to do that, because that's the pride of the nation. You can come into the space sector. You can have very different skill sets. You could be a space lawyer, you could be a policy analyst, you could be a scientist or an engineer, a technician, you can do remote sensing. Even an artist could work in the space sector, including medicine, biology. All of that is possible in the space sector. So to a lot of people, space policy might seem very boring, but it's absolutely necessary, because this is essentially the kind of framework you need to actually give direction in terms of how do you segment and structure the space ecosystem, essentially. And so when you're bringing in new expertise into the system, what is the process that one goes through? And if you look at the policy, it talks about different elements. So you come in through a human capital development pipeline, you could go through an industry, you could work in Africa. So it creates more opportunities in terms of how you segment the framework itself. So now that I've explained the aspects of a space policy and given you insights in terms of the space policy and the space strategy, I would really like to hear back from the youth in terms of your perspectives and what you would like to see in terms of these policy instruments going forward.
My name is Nondumiso Khumalo. I'm a space weather forecaster here at the South African National Space Agency.
My name is Boitumelo Makobe, 24 years of age. I'm from Pretoria.
Hello everybody, my name is Nkosinathi Masango and I am the current space weather forecaster here in SANSA.
I'm Tessa and I was born and raised in Cape Town.
My name is Katekile Shivambu. I studied meteorology at the University of Pretoria.
My name is Sergei Yariratilao. I'm a final year PhD student at Rhodes University in the Physics and Electronics department.
Hello, my name is Chantal. I am originally from Mpumalanga.
I studied a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I also pursued an honors degree in the National Astrophysics and Space Science program offered on the Westville campus at UKZN.
Went on to study electronic engineering for my undergraduate degree at Stellenbosch University. And now I've just finished my master's in electronic engineering and I'll be starting with my PhD in 2022.
I studied meteorology at the University of Pretoria. Did my honors also at the University of Pretoria. Continued to do my postgrad certificate in weather forecasting. So we were trained on public weather, aviation and marine weather forecasting.
I am studying traveling atmospheric disturbances using the SANSA radar, which is based in Antarctica.
I studied meteorology at the University of Pretoria, and I also obtained a postgraduate certificate in weather forecasting.
I am a master's student at the University of the Western Cape, where I do my research, which primarily focuses on Earth observation.
I studied meteorology at the University of Pretoria, so I did my degree, my undergraduate, and then my honors. And then from there onwards, I went to the South African Weather Service, where I obtained my postgraduate forecasting certificate for 10 months. So I went under training for that, and then here I am today.
I think one of the first things that triggered my interest in science was when I was first introduced to subjects like physics in high school. I was also always fascinated by how physics was able to explain the fundamentals of everything that is happening around us. So for example, the chair you sit in is made up of atoms. The air you breathe is made up of oxygen molecules. And the reason for when you throw something up and it comes back down is because of gravity. So I was always interested and fascinated by such concepts, and for that reason, I really knew that I had to go into the science field as a career.
What triggered my own interest was basically just watching the news. I used to watch the weather forecast, and yeah, I didn't even know that it was a science field. I just wanted to do that. It looked quite cool, telling people whether it will rain or not. So yeah, that's what triggered me.
I've always enjoyed logic puzzles and games and things like that. Like when I was small, I had this book that was just mazes, and you just had to draw a path. And this book was about 150 pages of just mazes. And that kind of thing is just something I've always loved. So then at school, when we had maths and science subjects, they were always the ones I was more interested in, and I always did far better in them than I did in English or arts or languages. None of those were good for me. So I never really had a specific trigger. For me, it was just always, this is what I want to do, this is what I like doing.
What triggered me to study specifically physics or like be interested in science and technology would be, I think it's the challenge for me. When we are in school, everyone said that physics is difficult, maths is difficult, those kind of things they've been saying. And for me, that was interesting for me because I want to be able to be the one who knows those difficult parts and explain it to them or know how to solve it.
I was fascinated by the rain, actually. I used to love rain, be obsessed watching it through the window. And then that got me interested in wanting to study the atmosphere.
My interest began, I think, in high school, early high school, grade 8. We had to compete in a competition where we were supposed to find renewable resources for energy and electricity. And we had to form teams to basically compete in this competition. And our team decided to work on building a solar train that gets energy from the sun and everything. So we collaborated and worked together. And in that space or that time, I found my interest in science and technology, and I enjoyed the problem solving, the collaborating with other individuals, and yeah, I saw the importance of science.
I used to love looking at clouds, when I was about grade 1, grade 2. So I always wondered why it was raining, why are there different clouds? Sometimes you get like a wispy cloud, you'll just get like a fluffy cloud or like a bumpy cloud. So I would be like very interested in knowing why is that cloud like that? Why is there rainfall when you have certain clouds? When you don't have certain clouds, there's no rainfall. So I got very curious from that point onwards. I just started wanting to know how everything around me works, especially weather related stuff.
Specifically, like my physics teacher, especially, like he has that enthusiastic personality when he's giving us examples of physics, like the way he solves the questions. And I think that's where I get triggered, no, I have to be very much focused on physics and do this, solve problems and be good at physics, because wow, he's so much engaging with the students, and there's problems that they're they are solving. He was solving is it was very much engaging, and I think me and my classmates, I remember that time, we were very much interested in physics because of the teacher, definitely.
The quality of our education was, can I say average? Yes, it was average.
There are so many schools, I don't know, in underdeveloped areas or rural areas of South Africa that are not really resourced enough to be able to push the agenda of space and science and technology and engineering.
There's still more that needs to be done in terms of education, in terms of research, in terms of resources that needs to be pumped into encouraging young people into this field?
When we look in terms of the current educational system in the country, especially that focuses on maths and science, I think the government can do more to intervene, create also these awareness projects where they try by all means to remove that fear that learners have of saying that maths and physics is hard. Because of that stigma, they don't want to study that.
So I believe that if you really want to instill something in someone, you need to start them off whilst they're still young. Because there's a saying in isiZulu that says, "Umuthi ugojwa usemanzi," which means the same thing. If you want to instill something in a young person, you need to start them off while they're still young. So with this said, I believe if the government focuses more on primary schools, introducing the idea of space, science, and technology in primary schools, this will serve a great role in terms of inspiring the next generation to be interested.
I think it actually starts at an early age, because with me, I think I was curious at an early age, and I do think that the curiosity needs to be nurtured, you know.
If we have like interactive learning and just introduce the youth to science and that it is fun, then we can be able to like get more interest.
I think that the government should implement more programs where young kids can be hands-on when it comes to projects and innovations.
I think they can put science labs like this one I'm in to get students to do experiments and get more excited about science at a young age, instead of going through theory and then get to experience experiments in university.
I didn't follow the national curriculum at school. I did the Cambridge curriculum, which honestly I think really made a difference for first year varsity, because a lot of the work that was new or really difficult we had touched on or partially covered at school already. So I think that the level of education, secondary education for maths and science in the country is lacking and really needs to be pushed up. Otherwise, this gap between secondary and tertiary education is just going to keep getting bigger.
Visits to industries like SANSA as well batteries around the country to see that where their future can be lead them, so that they could be interested and know what, if you study physics or chemistry or mathematics, where do you end up? That kind of things can be helpful for them to see the industries.
I think the country actually has a lot of people that are very interested in this field and want to go into it. But there are two big limiting factors that sort of prevent them from getting there. The one is financial. A lot of people simply can't afford to study further after your secondary education, your high school. You simply can't afford to go to university. So I think the government should put more focus on providing bursaries and scholarships to students who otherwise are simply unable to pursue science and technology fields, even though they really want to. The other limiting factor is there's a really large gap between secondary education and tertiary education. So the dropout rate for first year university students is extremely high, because when you suddenly go from matric to first year, the work just gets so much harder and you don't know where you stand. So I feel a lot of support could be put into these extended degree programs that a lot of the universities offer, that sort of have a bridging year between your end of matric and your start of official first year, to try and get all of the topics merged between the two so that it's not such a big jump. I think promoting these and making them seem less like, oh, they need an extra year, and more like this is just normal, would help a lot of people to make it through varsity as opposed to dropping out in first year. Or a lot of people also switch away from science and technology to other fields of business or arts because they feel that maybe they're just not suited for it, when it might just be that their maths and science at secondary education level isn't quite up to scratch.
I would suggest that the government should fund institutions or companies that promote the study of maths and science, such as perhaps the CSIR and all of those innovation hub companies, so that they have enough money to also add to the candidates that can receive their bursaries.
One thing I can think of is actually working toward these big projects that can put South Africa or Africa in the spotlight, so that kids, they can hear about these projects, the science and technology, that what people are doing in media, social media everywhere. Then definitely this can attract kids.
I feel South Africa doesn't necessarily have all of the resources in terms of funding or skilled professionals as other countries do. So development in that area might help to put us more on the world map for science and technology, because you need to have leading people in the field. And if you don't have people trained in that field, you're never going to get there.
As much as I was studying a science degree in school, I always had that worry that perhaps what if I do not actually find a job in the science field? The number of jobs that we have, I would say, is not as high as we would have compared to other countries. So it has been a concern.
Okay, currently I am a space weather forecaster at the South African National Space Agency based in Hermanus. So I'll be working as a forecaster at the new regional space weather center, which will be run 24/7.
So doing my PhD next year, I'm mainly focused on the fields of superconducting electronics, which is something a lot of other countries are paying a lot of attention to at the moment. And the research group I'm part of is part of a big international collaboration of different countries from the US, from Japan, from France, that are all focused on trying to make it easier for people to design and use superconducting components. In the future, I don't necessarily know where I will be going. I might be staying in South Africa because there is that research team here focused on this topic. But there also seem to be lots of opportunities in other countries specifically around this area. So I'll just have to see what happens after my PhD.
How I view my future, specifically in this science field, it would be through research, because I believe that not only do you, as a researcher, you address the gaps, but you promote an opportunity to have innovative ideas that are also relevant and helpful to the field.
My future in the space science industry, I would love to continue being a space weather forecaster, but I would also love to train other young minds to do what I do, and also I would also love to contribute in the research department.
I see my future in the field of space science and technology as being part of groundbreaking research in this field, and implementing the skills and experiences I had from my postgraduate studies.
I feel South Africa has a long way in progress in integrating women in science, and I feel that there's room where I could also occupy those spaces. And I believe if I continue to commit myself to self-development, because science and technology is always evolving, and stay relevant and skilled, then I can be able to penetrate those spaces and thrive.
When I eventually found a job in the science field, I was beyond ecstatic, because it has always been my childhood dream to finally find myself in a science-related career. So working at the South African National Space Agency, I would say, is a dream come true. Because for starters, we will be the first 4 space weather forecasters in South Africa, and we also happen to be the first 4 Black young women space weather forecasters in South Africa. So that is exciting. So with this, I look forward to encouraging other youth out there that it is possible to pursue a career in this field, and it's filled with adventure, and I really believe that they will enjoy it.
I feel like the field of science, technology, engineering, and math is very exciting, and it's broad. So you can't really know where you find yourself. If you just focus on your science and maths, you'll find yourself working in the space agency. You'll find yourself working in business and also dealing with big data and all of those things, and providing space solutions and engineering feats, and it will also expose you to other international networks and relations that can help boost your career.
I believe South Africa is capable of competing on a global scale when it comes to science and technology, because it has grown in terms of its space capabilities and also its skills development in the field.
I do think that South Africa can compete on a global stage because of some of the collaborations that are there. There is the Super Dawn radar there in Antarctica. So basically that's like a collaboration between South Africa and countries like Russia, countries like France and the United States. So I do think that, you know, this collaboration allows South Africa, as I've mentioned, to be put on the map and to actually also make it its impact in the global space arena.
In some aspects, I think South Africa can compete in the global stage for science and technology. For example, the Square Kilometre Array, the SCAR project, that's taking place mainly in South Africa and Australia. Obviously, South Africa is heavily involved with this project and helping to design the satellite dishes and everything to get it to work. In addition, in our medical field, we are quite strong. For example, the genomic sequencing that's used for COVID testing, South Africa's leader in that we're one of the only countries that can identify new variants of disease.
Because not only is South Africa making strides in the astronomy field, it is also making great strides even in the space science field. Because for the first time in Africa, we will be hosting the first 24/7 operational space weather center next year in 2022.
South Africa has a huge role to play in terms of introducing space science to the regions. I think they can even start at a young scale here in South Africa, and also improving to or including the other countries, the African regions.
I believe that we already are competing in the global field in science and technology. And for example, the South African education sector, we also rank as the top countries that are performing in computer science and engineering education. And also our South African Large Telescope provides valuable information which can only be found in the Southern Hemisphere on astronomical bodies.
South Africa is the only African country where the space program is developing in a robust way, and it's like emerging in a robust way. Even in research, you could say it's like the top African country when it comes to space research.
South Africa, I believe, yes, they can compete with other global countries in the space science field, in a sense that we have a number of companies that form part of the aerospace supply chain. So they do contribute to the design and innovation and development and ideas to build microsatellites for other countries. So if countries outside can trust our country with such intellectual knowledge and developments, then I think we are at the right stage where we can say we do have the capabilities to compete.
I don't think most South Africans know that we have a space program. When I tell them that I'm a space weather forecaster, they'll be like, oh, so you go to the moon? That's what they think.
Honestly, I don't think that normal South Africans know about the space policy. That's why it is important, for awareness to be there.
The word space, what it means to me would be not only do I think about going to the moon and all the rockets and all of that, but you also think about the technology that is controlled up in space. So we have your satellites up there, your GPS. Google Earth is the first thing I would say that comes to my mind when I think of space.
What I know about the South African space policy is it's about using the outer space for peaceful purposes and the benefit of humankind.
The South African space policy is a documentation that serves as a guide of how South Africa deals with space activities and its uses for the benefits of the country.
It fosters international relationships with a big focus on African countries to try and put Africa on the map as a world leader in space science. It also seems to have a large focus on developing human capital and infrastructure. So trying to bring up professionals in fields of engineering, space science, computer science that can contribute towards furthering the space program in the country.
It's a guiding tool that they use to ensure that they promote scientific research that is relevant into the science department, and also it promotes the innovation and development of ideas that would also contribute to the economy and the intellectual growth.
Basically, it tries to make the South African space program more competitive in a global space.
It leads to better infrastructure and skills in the country to help put South Africa on the world map as a leader in this field, which in turn helps to stimulate economic growth.
Some of its benefits are job creations, I can say. Yeah, it's going to create, actually it's already creating a lot of job opportunities, and I still think it will do that in the future.
The African region has lack of data, so I do think that, you know, the development and the improvement of the space program would result in, you know, the African region having its own database and, you know, being able to actually make use of its own data, you know, data that is space, that is location specific.
It is also an opportunity to advance our knowledge, especially in the research department, can get to discover more in the space field.
We gain valuable information or products, data services that are useful for decision making, which makes sure that all South Africans have an increased or better standard of living, and also protect our environments.
We would know how to be more prepared in terms of ensuring that our technological system is not affected. So we'd now know how to ensure that the public knows how to react towards these disruptions. And yes, and also enhancing knowledge, which is also important.
The space program also opens opportunities for youth to develop themselves and be skilled and qualified individuals within the space and science field.
My wildest aspiration for space weather development in South Africa or Africa as a whole is not only we should be competitors or be able to compete, but to also be the leaders of space weather field, because there's a difference between being a competitor and a leader, where in a sense that when you're a leader, you also have the potential to influence people in your vision and how you would want to lead.
I really wish South Africa in the future becomes the hub of space weather or the hub of space science or astronomy.
I imagine also South Africa entering the global scenes and just creating a name in terms of space weather, space related activities.
South Africa should invest more in the ground-based observation equipments, so that they can get more coverage of their data. That will help a lot in research and also understanding more about the space weather.
We want to see our South African flag flying high in the moon and Mars.
If I could one day see an African on the moon, that would make me feel proud, basically, of being an African, of, you know, knowing that actually Africa has the capabilities to actually take somebody to the moon.
I believe it would inspire other South Africans, especially the youth, and make it tell them that it is possible to actually achieve such greatness, and it's not like an impossible dream.
So looking at space development in South Africa and what my wildest dreams are, it's actually not something big and crazy. It's not going, let's send someone to space. I feel like so many countries are focused on doing that without considering what effect they're actually having on the environment around them. So where I'd really like to see South Africa making a difference is being the one that goes out there and finds the way to clean up all the space debris. It's being the group that goes out there and goes like, no, this is not right. Look at all the rubbish that's out here. Let's clean everything up before we care about putting ourselves out there. Let's not have an ego contest and rather do something good for the environment.
For Africa to have a launch capability for satellites. Like one day I want to see Africa being able to launch a satellite that's built by Africans and being built, launch it from Africa, and that will be amazing.
I want to thank you for the insights you've provided, and which is really valuable, and also to maybe signal that there is an intention to set up an African Space Policy Institute. Europe has one, the US has one, but Africa doesn't have one. And the idea is to start thinking around policy perspectives. There's very many different policy questions that we need to answer. So gathering your insights is going to be very critical as we move forward. So I'm really excited with the opportunity that's coming forward as well. Thank you.